digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam special. We're coming at you live from the Hospital Club here in the bustling heart of London, and I am joined once again by the lovely Miki Callahan, and we have Marta with us as well.
Hello. Hi.
So ladies, for the benefit of our listeners who haven't met you before, would you care to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do? Marta, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, hi. So I am a marketer by day and mocap performer by night, or should I say more so mocap performer now. And I work on various very exciting projects, particularly involving combat and stunts.
And you have a sword collection.
And I have a sword collection, yes. And it's growing, and I'm so excited.
They're not paper mache swords.
No, they're not, but they're not sharp either. Just, if the police is listening.
So if we all come over your house, then it'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
That's, when people come over to my house, we have a sword fight, and we drink mead out of, clay cups and stuff.
Although I have to say, I have seen pictures of Marta in an axe-throwing pub. To throw axes.
Axe-throwing pub?
Yeah.
Well, it's not a pub. It's
axe-throwing pub and windmill.
They do not serve alcohol.
Oh, they don't? Okay, I thought they serve the beer with it as well.
But I have taken up this hobby, yes.
Okay.
And it is a lot of fun, and I recommend it.
Okay. Miki, why don't you tell us about your non-lethal...
Hi, everyone. My name is Mookie Cullen. I'm an executive digital producer, usually covering large-scale end-to-end production across web and app and social production and web and VR and AR and AI integration, and with quite a strong focus on the immersive content production. And within that space, I'm often dealing with actors and performers and within the music and television worlds. And this particular topic of the 360 Fight Club, when Tanya, you first started chatting to me about it, I said yes right away, because it's an important element for what we're about to discuss in 360 immersive filming and action actors.
Okay, so why don't we explain the context first of all? Because we're saying that this phrase 360 Fight Club, and a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, first of all, you shouldn't talk about Fight Club. But second of all,
first rule,
there's 360.
One rule, Tanya.
We had one job. We messed up the first rule.
We did make a rule. Once we get it sorted and we know what we're doing, then we can talk about it.
But let's talk about the history of where this comes from and why we feel it's an important thing to actually do. And so I think the first thing to understand is, in terms of the stunt community and the performance community, the fact that actually even without immersive 360 film or VR or any of that other stuff, it's actually quite a dangerous living. There are significant risks to health and to life.
Even without swords.
Even without swords.
With your bare hands.
With your bare hands. But we have seen a lot of instances recently where quite significant productions have had fatal incidents, whether that is on Mission Impossible films or the Mad Max film or The Walking Dead. These are all very popular, very well-known TV shows and movies, and they have had deaths. And that is not entirely uncommon. And that is obviously a concern just in and of itself for the regular stunt and performance community. But when we add into that the fact that there is this emerging immersive 360 film community who are beginning to start asking questions, beginning to start asking stunt performers and performers in general to begin to do things for 360 film, there is this gap of knowledge and understanding of what it is that people are being asked to do. And if people are already being asked to do things that are extraordinarily high risk, that put their lives in danger, and yet when they're asking someone to do it for 360, I'm hearing people say, can we do this without padding? Can we do this full contact? Can we do this without rigging? And all these other kinds of questions that I hear people ask. And when you kind of drill into that and you say, but why? Why would you need to do it that way? The first response from a lot of people is, well, a 360 camera can see everything. It's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. It can see a lot, but that's not an excuse to put somebody's life at risk. And so for me, the original reason to want to get together with a group of experts to discuss these things was around the safety and welfare of the stunt and performance communities who are now being engaged with by these people who are coming into 360 film and 360 content, who don't necessarily have a background in film production. They might have more of a background in game production, for example, or they might come from a theatre background or whatever the creative background is. where they don't necessarily understand how to engage and how to hire these people, but also B, what you can ask for that is safe and that looks after the welfare of these people, or to understand the quirks of the stunt and the performance community. And so that's really where the antithesis, if you like, of the 360 Fight Club came from. And so in our first little mini project back in October of 2017, gosh, we're already in 2018, that's scary.
Yeah.
We got together with a vast array of different types of performers. And that included stunt performers, it included combat specialists, so martial arts and firearms instructors, parkour and dance choreography, and various other different types of performance, including mocap as well, of course. And alongside 360 filmmakers, alongside VR content creators, to try and understand, okay, what are the inherent questions that need to be asked when it comes to physical performance? And by this, I mean something that is not about the artistic performance, but about the physicality of the movement and the danger of the movement. And therein lies the difference. And I think that there is perhaps a little bit of a disconnect over what people have traditionally thought of as performance for VR and 360, being about the emotion of that performance versus the physicality of performance and what that involves. So, having caveated all of that,
Very good intro.
Gone into great detail.
Comprehensive.
What I want to do, first of all, is kind of just split this out and talk about, first of all, from a production side, Muki, the things that were the key highlights for you in terms of the things that you realised that you weren't aware of before, or the things that kind of bubbled up to the surface that you just kind of began to become very much aware that maybe this is the conversation we need to be having.
From a production point of view, when we were first chatting about it, we weren't quite sure what cameras we were using. And I think the big learning here is experimenting with different kinds of cameras and finding out what works. And obviously we were doing it's essentially a great R&D project and really discovering these learnings. And we ended up going for a Nokia Ozo, RIP. RIP the Ozo.
Literally the week it was going
literally, we booked this kit. I booked this kit and, a crew, DOP and everything. And then 2 days after I booked it, Nokia discontinued the line. And I had like a week of support left. So thank goodness the shoot was like 2 days later. That said, I think it worked well for what the project was. And having this rig in the middle of the room and it's spherical. So it gave inexperienced performers a point of focus because obviously it's round and although it's not that big, like a little half of a basketball or two grapefruits, I would say like Insta360s are more like a grapefruit and the Nokia Ozo is like a mini volleyball, more like a volleyball. How do I put that into global terms? Well, volleyball. Look it up.
Look it up.
Beach volleyball. Yeah, the cantaloupe. There we go. We've had a salmon delivered. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted. But it is like the 360 spherical. Let's go back to the Nokia, folks. So I think from a production point of view, it was good to use the Nokia for this experiment to give the action performers a really good circle of focus, no pun intended. That was a good one. But also us as producers to give us a focus to see the movements and how, up and down and the different types of angles and the shapes that were being thrown in the choreography. So the choreography was really well thought out by Martin, Ronan, and Dan and the team. And what was really nice is that we were able to kind of morph what the original thoughts of that around the way the movements were happening and kind of like, it was almost like a flow, like of a river into an ocean almost around this camera. Yeah. And I think technical wise, always make sure if you can get a playback, please get it. We were low on budget and we weren't able to get one. Yeah,
we had some great moments. We had some amazing people there on the day that were able to really adapt to the needs. So we came into the project knowing that we had a base choreography that is going to have to change and adapt on the day. And we got the right people together that are able to do that in a safe way. And since October, we've also been experimenting, with cheaper cameras. So what can we do with a simple Samsung Gear 360?
Which is great for your practice. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's great for seeing how it works, but also seeing where the shortcomings of that kind of cheaper rig come in versus something as amazing as an Ozo. And it was just a very, very interesting experience to have overall.
Ditto.
So I think the interesting thing that kind of came from the collaboration was the variety of the different types of people that we had in that mix. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you were kind of working through that choreography with Dan and Ronan, there was obviously a lot of justification, a lot of modification that happened along the way because of the different types of expertise that we had in the mix at the time. And one of the things that I think perhaps is lacking in a lot of the major VR productions, the major 360 film productions that we see, is perhaps that collaboration with those cross industries, with those other people who have maybe different insights or different approaches to things. How was that for you?
So the first thing when it comes to having that collaboration from people who have this sort of subject matter expertise, as it were, in terms of combat, is that you need the right kind of person to take that and translate that into stage combat performance. The biggest core principle of stage combat is creating the illusion of risk to life, to limb, to whatever else, and not actually doing that. And somebody who will be able to, or should be able to translate that, is a good experienced fight coordinator. You need to have a fight coordinator that will be able to take those concepts, take that expertise from somebody who's a firearms expert, somebody who's an expert in certain type of martial art and parkour or whatever else. Parkour. And then be able to assemble the correct team. So definitely involve this fight coordinator in the casting. So they'll be able to assemble the correct team that has the right skills to then bring to the table and be able to do what's needed to be done to tell the story safely. So that process has to start before the cameras are set up.
Let's talk about casting, because there was this interesting conversation that we had earlier about this approach that we ended up calling it donuts. I'm not sure that's the best technical term, but we refer to the donuts of performance, if that's what we're going to call it.
Glazed. Wait, is this gluten-free donut?
Yeah, for somebody who's gluten-free, this is not
vegan.
But basically, we talked about this kind of three circular kind of sections, if you like, of performance, and the one that's closest to the center of the camera being kind of the high level expert, followed by the kind of secondary ring, which is people who have a good understanding, good experience, but aren't necessarily, good high action performers or your key actors, for example. And then you have your third or tertiary ring, which is kind of, we were almost saying extras would be kind of the zone that you could have those additional kind of
the sprinkles
performers.
on top.
Yeah, the sprinkles on the top. But even within that context, when we talked about those extras, there is a certain degree of knowledge and awareness that still needs to be had for those extras, because as we were discussing earlier, a standard extra is somebody that can, mill about in the background and wander back and forth. And, there is very little instruction that's required here. Whereas somebody who is walking onto a 360 film set needs to at least have a basic understanding of the zone of performance, the danger of interaction with the wrong zone of performance, how they are presenting themselves at all times. Certain things that perhaps a regular extra just doesn't really need to contemplate.
So is it a casting of the donut layers and rings?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me explain the donuts. This is a very technical term, clearly.
And the sprinkles are just as important.
So absolutely. We'll talk about the actors are the sprinkles. Or are they the filling? Oh my, I'm getting hungry all over again. So what the donuts refer to is the proximity to the camera. So the first donut, as it would be, we'll probably come up with a better term for this, by the way.
I like the donut.
So the first donut is the closest to the camera, is the ring, the area immediately around the camera. The second donut is one donut away from the camera, and so on and so forth, as you can imagine. Now, because you can see the most detail of the performance in the first donut, that's where you want to have your most highly skilled performers, if you go by that logic, because you're going to be able to see the most detail of the form, of what they're doing, and they're going to have to be able to perform this at a very high standard. When you move a little further away, the skill level can be a little bit lower, and the movement can be a bit simpler, because if you add more intricacy to the movement, it will be lost, because you're not zooming in. You don't have this tight frame that you're working with. It's a lot more like in theater. The further away you are, the less you were going to be able to see. And the tertiary ring, again, you can have even less. Now, there's a caveat when it comes to not just casting, just any extra, as it were, into it, is that when you're shooting in 360, everybody has to be working all the time, the entire continuous take. So again, that brings us closer to theater productions than it does to film productions, actually. And that's where a lot of filmmakers lose their confidence when they start going into 360 because they're used to film, not theater. And they're not used to having to account for the entire area around them. And it becomes more and more complicated the more open the area is. So you have nothing for people to hide behind when they're not needed, essentially. Like an open battle scene, even the people really far away, they're still visible, they're still gonna have to do something, and they're gonna have to have enough knowledge
to be able to sell it
and still do it, even though they're tiny specks in the frame.
No half-assed waving of a sword.
Yeah. And there's no hanging out. Imagine, just here's an example. Imagine you go to the Globe, and only the two. Okay, you're there. Are you there, McKay? Okay, great. And you know, you have this sword fight in this play. And everybody around them is just like kind of like hanging out. So, hey, it's not my turn yet.
Exactly.
You know, you can't have that. And one more, when you die, you need to act the death.
You're freaking dead, man.
You have
no
to
cockroach, no leg up.
Exactly. You're either like headshot, you're dead on the spot, or you got wounded. That doesn't mean you just drop out of frame. You never drop out of frame. That is the caveat. So you need to act death dramatically, even though the focus is not on you. It might be. It's up to the viewer.
So two things to add to that. So very, 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 really, really excellent points there, Marta. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. We're having tagliatelle and salmon today.
Delicious.
The 2 points to that. From a production point of view, from that end product, to me, especially filming in this immersive space and that 360 world and the 3D world, the people the farthest away still contribute to the story because the layers of the visuals that you'll see in the end product. So for me, I'm there on set. I'm thinking that guy furthest away, I'm watching him to make sure he's adding to those layers in the storyline, just as much as I was watching it, you know, working with the director to get the people closest to the camera around. The second point about like when an action performer, your line ends when you're not walking off the set. If you do walk off the set, you have a long way to go and you have to stay in character. Remember not to just to go like 10 feet and go, oh my God, that was shit, whatever. You know, but when you do have like a death scene, you have to stay perfectly still. And I think we've got some really great blooper rushes to show how you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And people corpsing or laughing or going like, oh, whatever.
Opening their eyes?
Opening their eyes or just going like, hey, I'm not bleeding for real, you know. And I think we got some good points there. Yeah, and I think it's the next time we do a 360 Flight Club, you know, and we got a bit of funding to have it in a set and have it in a set design and do some proper post-production on it. We'll be able to showcase this skeletal of our first round of a go, I think.
It actually reminds me a lot of the stuff you record for video game voiceover, where you do the main lines, but then you also have to do everything down to the nitty-gritty sounds, the emotes, so you're going into the mic going, you know, like, and even just breathing heavily while the character is running. That kind of mentality has to
thing for us.
Oh, just, you know, normal, but not into a microphone like I just did now. But when you're on the 360 set, you need to think of your performance to that level of detail, no matter how important or unimportant, so I'm doing air quotes right now, your role is. You need to think of that level of detail in your performance. So if the take is going to be 5 minutes, you're going to be sitting there and you got cut in the first 30 seconds. You're going to be sitting there bleeding or whatever else for the next 4.5 minutes. And you're going to act it. You're going to have to think of ways to act it without being too...
So we had to cut a couple times because there was broken. That fourth wall was broken.
Yeah.
And I say fourth wall, the fourth dimensional, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, eighth octagonal wall.
Yeah, physics people.
Yeah, I think I think this podcast specifically is a little bit of an icebreaker into some of these insights, and there's more to come.
But
sure.
I definitely think that there will be more conversations about this further down the line. But one of the things I do want to pick up on really briefly before we wrap up this conversation is just to talk about one of the things that you kind of alluded to, Marta, and which we ended up being very deliberate about during this process was not being afraid to actually build a set that allowed us to hide performers and hide certain parts of the action sequence, so that it's not this constant thing of, I've got to have whiplash, I've got to keep on staring at the action and following this piece of action, and instead by creating walls and creating windows to be able to frame that action and to be able to draw the eye to certain pieces of action, but also in the same kind of, flip side of that coin, to be able to hide it as well. And I know that there are a lot of people who are listening who might be thinking, but why would you hide the action? Why would you hide that last, killer punch? Or
the drama, mate.
Exactly.
But again, this comes back to the whole thing of, we don't need to see every single moment of a fight, and we don't need to see every single moment of damage that's being inflicted. And this comes back to that very original point of people saying, oh, but a 360 camera can see everything, and therefore I need you to do this without wires and without padding and full impact. And when you die, you're going to fall, 3 stories and everybody's going to see it. And all these things. Like, no, actually, the most traditional part of stunt work has always been to create the illusion and to hide the reality of what's actually happening. But let's talk about the fact that we did build these sets, if you like, and we created a lot of towers. I'm going to call them towers.
Prison break. Prison walls.
Yeah, no, so we use very expertly made cardboard boxes to construct. It was like real life Minecraft. Because we could stack them into whatever we needed them to be, whether it was a wall that was across or a wall facing the camera, whatever it was. And it allowed us to, first of all, start with nobody visible by the camera, and allow the hero or main antagonist, whoever else, to come in and give that dramatic tension, because you didn't know where people were hiding. People could jump and ambush them without the viewer actually knowing, and it actually ended up giving the viewer a role themselves. Like, what if they were a hostage? They were not just the silent observer, they're kind of part of the action, which really brings in the immersive side of 360, that you're in the middle of it. Being able to play with the environment that you have around you, not just be stuck with open worlds, which I think is actually quite boring in reality, is going to be very important in progressing content and storytelling for 360. And I was going to make another point, but I can't remember it now, so I'm going to hand over to Nikki.
So adding to that, from a production point of view, the box sets creating this kind of like, physically, emotionally virtual walls were not only important in the visual sense, but to me, and I know our director and our DOP agreed, was also adding that element, the illusion, adding in that element illusion with the addition of sound. And the sound effects. So even if you couldn't see an actor or a piece of action happening, you can hear something happening behind that wall or behind the door, or look out, and then suddenly you're turning around and finding like what's happening there. So from my production point of view, to me, it was very important to experiment with that, because the whole project's a great experiment, and I can't wait to build more on it. But when you do see the final product, you go like, oh, what's that sound? But then it makes you kind of like go, oh my God, what's going to happen around the corner? Like a good illusion of suspense would give you. And that's where you guys did that so well. And we collectively did it well overall, considering we had like a day of no rehearsal and winging it. So.
Consider this, that we're not even covering things that we find out about stitch lines and acting around those. And we're not covering a bunch of other areas. We can. Well, maybe next time. I don't want to give it all away right away. No, so there's things like stitch lines. There were various aspects of performance that we didn't address. And also in the design and placement of the choreography for the viewer themselves, like not giving your viewer whiplash. That is quite important.
But you
People
guys
get really
took that into consideration, I think. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. There is a certain level of design, though, because there's sometimes you might want the person to do a complete 180 turn to see the next bit of action, but you don't want to have them do that all the time.
Yeah.
And things like that.
That's part of the choreography. Also comes with, it was almost our production choreography to complement and match your physical choreography. And on the day, I just want to touch on the stitch line thing, just a touch. We didn't have playback on the day, so we were looking at the picture from the Ozo camera on a monitor where we were able to view the stitch line. So we did have to start and stop a lot of that choreography with keeping in mind that the stitch lines, it was something wasn't matching right. So we were able to kind of work through that and reposition some of the scenes and the heights and the levels, and even people on the floor were like, no, you got to move to the left, you got to move to the right, which I think, it's okay not to have the playback on a day like what we had. I think it was good learning curve and made you guys work a little bit even harder to keep those stitch lines in mind. You know, we had the floor marked and stuff, but
you need to know when you're falling backwards. When you're falling backwards and you're about to be. It's okay. I got this. When you're falling backwards and you've got, you're hoping that you're going to land somewhere next to the stitch line, but sometimes, you take a step too far, whatever else it is, it does actively have to be a thing in your mind. You have to fall on the mark. You can't go over even by a foot, because it's not just a stitch line. If you have a group choreography, that means that the next person, if they're supposed to fall next to you, are going to fall onto you. It becomes unsafe. Or another person's going to all of a sudden have to run and jump over you, and they might not be expecting it because there's a piece of set.
One more on top of that one, when we were given direction to the actors, to the action actors, it was so interesting to see. We gave instruction to one of you, but all of you had to listen.
Yes.
And I loved that because it was like one unit. It was different from directing a music video or a play or something where it's like, okay, Martha, this is for you and you're going to go this way.
Yeah.
Everyone had to pay attention because...
Well, it's no longer about individual performance. And that...
The individual performance is the 360.
Yeah. And
the donut.
That's one of the things that I think, again, is a significant learning that needs to be educated and shared, is that it's not about individual performance when you are creating performance for 360. But on that note, on that bombshell, we are going to wrap this particular episode up since we are here live at the Hospital Club over lunchtime. I am going to ask, though, as always, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a little bit more about you, and we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be?
At Mookie Approved, MUKIAPPROVED on Twitter and Instagram, and also Mookie Colhan on LinkedIn.
And for me, it's at Martholio on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm going to put a shameless plug here to check out my latest video game voiceover reel, because I just got it done. It's freaking amazing. So give that a listen to if you...
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us this week, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. digitaljamsessions.com